Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to Making Waves to Move to Joy, a series of mini webinars where Johanna and Marie get real about the ebb and flow of finding lasting joy and happiness as women and as leaders. So we do have quite a few people joining us this morning in the audience. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. So as we are getting started, Johanna, you want to kind of give us a little warm-up activity?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Marie. So for those of us who are attending live, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. And if you can join us and just sharing what's one thing that brought you joy in the last week. For me, my one thing was actually moving my daughter into university for her sophomore year. It was so good to see her settle into a new season, reconnect with her friends, and dive right back into campus life. And how about you, Marie?
Yeah, so for me, I got to go to New York City this past weekend, which is about a 3.5 hour drive from where I am, and got to swim in the Hudson River, which for me was exciting. Most people don't consider that great, but I had a blast. And then my best friend was with me, and so we got to take in a Broadway show.
Ooh.
Um,
Oh, I
so
love that. That's so wonderful. I mean, bringing the things that you love together, right? The Broadway show, the musical, and swimming. I know how much that
yes,
brings you joy.
yes, yes. So, and I see our chat is a little slow. We've got some shy people in the chat today.
That's no
So
problem. We'll be talking all about joy throughout the rest of the session.
Thank
But we
you.
also do know that your time is valuable, so we want to make sure that you're going to get the information that you need from this series. And if you've joined because you want to learn why joy sometimes feel harder to hold on to while at work and what regaining it could look like and even how to sustain it. So go ahead and type yes in the chat. But if you're happy and fulfilled in your current role or you're not willing to dive deep into the ups and downs of those emotions, this might not be the best value of your time.
yes, and as we go through this series, we will be unpacking some of the top reasons that women leaders really struggle to find joy. We're going to share our stories. We're going to explore some of the lessons we've learned to help recapture that joy. And we're going to hope that you can apply some of those lessons to your life as well to reignite your own joy. So let's tell them a little bit about who we are. Johanna?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a certified professional coach who works with high potential mid-career women who are navigating change. I spent 25 years in corporate leadership, and I've seen how easy it is to get pulled in 100 different directions. And sometimes that joy can feel like it's the first thing to go. So my work right now is really about helping women create clarity, confidence, and really focus on energy, right? And how they can then sort of live their life on their own terms, right? So really making sure that we're cultivating those moments of joy in everything that we do. And Marie, a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I am also a certified professional coach. I work with mission-driven entrepreneurs who are facing a decision point in their business, whether that is to pivot, expand, or maybe even step away to move on to a new part of their life. So I did create a personal mission statement in my early 30s and as an emerging corporate leader to connect people with the best parts of themselves. And I've been trying to live out that mission. And my professional coach persona is kind of my next piece of that. Um, and I know as we start to dig into this today that I've been guilty of believing those myths that we're talking about in this webinar series. And so now I work with people who want to challenge those myths and how they're showing up in their careers and their businesses and help them rebuild professional lives that are both successful and fulfilling.
Yeah, I love that, Marie, right? Finding the joy in success and finding that fulfillment in what we're doing. And that's exactly what we talk about through the course of this 6-part webinar. We're exploring what that joyful career can look like. And while we won't be able to solve every challenge, we will provide insights on what may be holding you back by telling you the stories of where we felt that our careers were being held back because of some of these myths. At the end of each episode, we'll also invite you to discover more about how we can help you create your personalized path to joy, whether you are a corporate leader or a mission driven entrepreneur. So, Marie, in episode 1, we actually talked about the myth of the corporate safety net. And today we're unpacking another really big myth, the myth of you can't say no. So the question I have is like, why do we often say yes to a boss, a client, or a colleague when deep down we know that we want to say no? So I'm curious for you, Marie, looking back at your corporate career, were there times where you said yes to something when your gut told you to say no?
Yeah, yes, all the time. There were times when I said yes, and I was like, this is not the best idea. So a great example of that for me is taking on overtime. So I had started in a new company. I was working on a big project. I was in a consultant role, which was new for me at that time. I promised myself after years of working those extra hours that I was not going to fall into that trap because so often I gave more time and more energy than I got in raises or promotions if I got either of those. So as a consultant, I felt like I really had to perform for the client, or, risks and consequences, including losing my position. And so when a big project required me to move a vacation I had scheduled, I did that. I moved a vacation. I don't think I even got a thank you. And then a few months later to when I had moved it, we were still in the middle of this project because it was just giant. And I ended up working part-time on my vacation. I should have said no, but felt like I really had to say yes. And I've seen that sometimes in myself as an entrepreneur and in the entrepreneurs I work with as a coach. So, how about you, Johanna?
Yeah, yeah, and I hear what you're saying there, Marie, right? In some ways, by saying yes to those over hours, that over time, you were sacrificing yourself in many ways, right? And similar things for me, but for me, the reasons why I said yes were not about overtime, but about the stories I was telling myself. Specifically, that I couldn't say no to an opportunity even when it came for fear. So this example actually is from early in my career. I had been working in talent acquisition and candidate experience actually for about 10 years. And it was a really successful opportunity, really successful role. I had actually just won what was the first ever MVP award. It was peer and leader recognition for my contributions to the team. The company started to kind of go through, a series of transformation and changes. And one morning, it was 6:30 in the morning, I got a call from a leader who said, "There's an amazing new opportunity, and you can't say no." And in many ways, they were right, right? It was meaningful work. It was focused on colleague experience versus candidate experience. It genuinely excited me. But at the same time, I was terrified. And that's where sort of this myth of the fear of saying no took hold for me. I actually was telling myself that I can't turn this down. I can't risk disappointing anyone. I can't risk my future by saying no. And then the myth that we talked about last time, that sort of corporate safety net,
Mhm.
actually amplified that fear. It was sort of whispering subconsciously, if I fail in this opportunity, I could lose my security. I could lose everything I've worked so hard for. So I convinced myself I have to succeed. I can't fail. I I was thinking like I have to do this versus I choose to do this or I get to do this amazing work. Really, I have to. So I was stepping into this exciting role with that mindset that I have to do it versus I get to do it. And that meant that I carried a lot of pressure instead of possibility.
Yeah. And so I hear that underlying fear for both of us, right, is
Mhm.
we felt like we had to say yes because of that myth of the corporate safety net that we kind of dug into in that episode one. And fear underlies a lot of people's reasons for saying yes when they
Mhm.
feel like they should say no. And I did just drop in the chat for anybody that is with us that would like to kind of share where you have said yes in your career or business where you should have said no. But as we start to think about that pressure instead of the possibility, right? And your story was a great example of that, Johanna. Why do you think we find it so difficult to set those boundaries and to say no when we want to, especially at work?
Yeah, so what's interesting? I've been thinking about this because that leader who actually told me you can't say no actually left the company just a few months after that experience. But I still carried the myths that I told myself, the fear of saying no, the weight of security tied to corporate life, all of those things long after they were gone. And I realized much, much later, right, that it wasn't that actually it was there was something underneath the fear, right? And what was underneath the fear really was guilt. And so it was stemming from my people pleaser tendencies, right? The people pleaser in me tied my value to always saying yes. So I believed that being the one who helped, who took on more, proved my worth. So boundary setting for me felt impossible because in my mind, saying no meant that I might damage my reputation, I might disappoint colleagues or leaders, or risk not being seen as someone who delivers good work. And another example actually came much later in my career when I said yes to a big cross functional project. On the surface, it was another thing that looked exciting and important. But deep down, I really did know I didn't have the bandwidth. Still, I said yes because I didn't want anyone to question my commitment or my capability. The cost was that there were evenings and weekends filled with lots of extra work. There was a lot of travel. I was very drained. And the joy that I had in this work really was slipping away. And it didn't just affect me. My team felt it too, because I wasn't prioritizing our core goals. They felt scattered and unclear. I wasn't giving them direction on what mattered most, and they couldn't see how this project that I was working on connected to our bigger priorities. At the heart of it all was guilt. I thought saying yes was proving my value, but in reality, it left me burned out and it left my team without the clarity that they needed.
Yeah. So it was interesting as you were telling that story, right? You were saying yes, even though you knew you probably should have said no. And it had implications not only for you and your family and your work-life balance, but for your team, your
Yeah,
work team as well, as it was stealing your joy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for me, I loved what you said about the fact that you had to prove yourself because that really came into why I was saying yes when I should have said no. It was, I mean, there was the obvious revenue issue as a consultant, but it was also that need to be perfect and to always succeed, to prove myself, to be the best. And by being the best, right, I could ensure success or, ensure the corporate safety net. We busted that myth last week. And so I chased perfection so that I could get promoted. I was chasing revenue, proving can succeed at whatever endeavor I set out to do. But meeting that definition of perfection that was kind of set out there by somebody else, I don't even know who the else is, really wasn't getting me very far except burned out. And so I also had lost my joy, was feeling that stress um, and that constant churn and hustle. And I really had to learn to let go of that external definition of perfection to find out what really worked for me, what aligned with my values, and what I wanted for myself both now and then in the future as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of things that you talked about there, Marie, that sort of stick with me, right? That idea of sort of chasing perfection, right? And how almost impossible it is to ever, get to being perfect. But also what you just said at the end about alignment and alignment with your values and what really you truly wanted
Right.
for yourself in the moment and envisioning your potential future. And that alignment piece, I think, is so powerful. And it leads us to the question that so many of us wrestle with is, when is it actually okay to say no? Or maybe even bigger, right? How do we learn to say no in the first place?
Yeah, and that's a tough one, right? We've been so conditioned through corporate work, but then also women. We tend to take on more. We tend to say yes a lot. And one way that I've kind of figured out when it's okay to say no is there's a book called The Best Question Ever. And it's one of my favorite books. And to paraphrase the answer to what the best question ever is, in light of my future dreams and goals, is this the right thing I should be doing? And so by framing it in overall perspective of, where do you want to go? What are your values? What are your dreams and your goals? What's bringing you joy? Um, that is definitely one way to look at it, especially with the logic side. And then the other side is your intuition. And if it doesn't feel right, your body knows, even if your mind can't find the reasons why or the words to express why it's wrong. Your body knows. And interesting enough, there's a lot of new research that says that your gut um, has a clear connection to your brain, and you do feel it when when you tune into that intuition. And the reality is, for me, there are times when I feel I do need to say yes, even though I want to say no. And by taking that pause between the immediate jumping to yes and saying, okay, why am I saying yes? That allows me to make that conscious choice. And that pause gives me that control over my decisions and, more importantly, over my energy. And so for me, it's of course easier said than done, but definitely trying to take that pause and make sure I've checked in with my gut and checked in with my brain before I say yes or I say no. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that sort of that almost holistic approach, right, to reflection. And I think what you highlighted there, the pause, right? That's so important to pause because it allows us to respond versus react, right? And I think you highlighted that and articulated that so not so wonderfully. And one thing I'll add to what you talked about is this, and it's a little controversial to say, but it's always okay to say no.
oh,
Always. But for many of us, that is the hardest truth to accept because we've been conditioned to believe that saying yes makes us valuable, dependable, or safe. But learning to say no is really about protecting your energy and making intentional choices. Exactly what you just talked about, Marie, right?
mhm.
Asking yourself the why behind the decision and, asking yourself how it aligns to, what truly matters to you. And for me, the nuance is sometimes it's not about saying no to the opportunity itself, right? It's saying no to the pressure we attach to the
Ah,
opportunity. So there were roles and projects I genuinely wanted to do. And I really did, want to step into that role that I was told I couldn't say no to. But instead of stepping into them with excitement and choice, I was stepping into them with fear and guilt and the weight of proving myself. So the energy turned what could have been possibility into pressure. And so often for me, the quick yes might still just be a reaction. It's not a choice. It's not a response. It's coming from habit. It's coming from fear, or it's coming from that, people pleaser impulse. And when I'm in that space, it feels like I don't have a choice. And I'm stuck with that have to energy instead of that choose to energy. So I've been intentional, just like you, Marie, in really stepping back and pausing and checking in with my values and responding instead of reacting. Because when we do that, that's cultivating that choose to energy. And that's where the power is. When your no isn't about rejection, it's about alignment. But here's the truth, right? Many of us live under the illusion of choice. We think we're deciding freely, but really it's our past experiences and our fears that are running the show. And the work that I know we both do with ourselves and with our clients is about breaking that cycle, helping us all to see that we always have choice and that a conscious no is actually a yes to alignment, to energy, and to joy.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, right? We always do have the option of saying no. And really, that illusion of choice and creating that awareness. So it truly is, here's the, what I think might be the consequences of a yes or a no. Here's the consequences to my energy and as well as, to me and those around me. Um, so we talked a little bit about developing that pause, that ability to have a conscious choice. And you gave some great examples of that, Johanna. For those in our audience, what are some ways that they can start to create that awareness and have that conscious choice in their own life so they can either say no or say yes from a place of true decision as opposed to that illusion?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things that listeners can do, right, to bring conscious choice into reality. And I think the first is really about, reflection, right? Sometimes it really is about taking that pause and reflecting on the last time that you said yes when you actually wanted to say no, and really understand, what did it cost you in time, energy, or joy, right? So it's all about the first step being truly take a moment to reflect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is really, as you said, it's the first step. And I think that's why it's number one on the list, right? You really have to think about the cause and the cost. And it is a lot of different things. And as you start to think about that, right, you have to first identify it. But then I think we need to look at the why behind our yes. And is it coming out of fear? Is it coming out of a need to prove themselves, to be a people pleaser, to obligation, guilt, fear of missing out? I say yes to a lot of things when I probably should say no. And that's just in my personal life. It's because I don't want to miss out on the fun stuff.
Mhm,
And so it's more than just at work, right? We were very focused on professional lives in this particular webinar, but it's across the board,
mhm.
um, that we probably need to look at this. And so if we've identified some situations and thought about the why behind it, what do we do if we feel like we need to say yes, but we don't know how to say no? What can we do?
Yeah. So I think there's actually a couple of things, right? So we focused in on the reflection and, understanding, what was going on when we did say yes. When we wanted to say no, we've identified the why behind it. The next thing is to put it into practice, right? So there's a couple things here. Creating a safe no statement, right? So what's a simple phrase that you could use for when you want to protect your energy without even trying to over explain the why behind it, right? For example, it could be as simple as, I can't take that on right now. Or it could be, that doesn't fit with my priorities at this time. So it can be very simple. And I think the other thing, just to even add, right, because I see a couple of comments in the chat about where we've accepted some of these roles or opportunities. We know they're not ideal. So we may be in that situation, right? Like my example was, I accepted the opportunity. I accepted it from from the energy of fear versus the energy of choice. So create that safe no statement for the ones that you do want to say no to. But for the ones where you're like, maybe I am saying yes to this, articulate the why you're saying yes to it, right? So why is the why behind your yes, articulate that, make sure it aligns with your values. So the three things, right? In summary, reflect, identify the why, create a safe no statement, and practice, right? Practice saying no,
Practice,
practice saying yes,
practice.
saying
Yes.
it from the right reasons.
Yes. And that practice, right, is key. And sometimes we do get stuck in our own head. And so for a lot of us, including myself, I do find it very useful to work with a trusted person outside of my immediate circle, who can kind of see some possibilities that I can't, and who can really kind of impartially help me kind of discover when I need to say no, where I used to say yes. Or if I'm saying yes, why? And
Mhm.
techniques to kind of practice that pause.
Yeah.
And so for both of us, whether it's through the Waves transformation journey or the Move to Joy framework, we do help people create a process where they can begin to identify and no longer have the illusion of choice, but have a true conscious choice of what they are doing. And so I'll drop our contact information in the chat. And then, Johanna, as we start to wrap up today, what might be coming up?
Yeah, so this was a great conversation, Marie, and it always just reminds me that, we do have choice, and it's always okay to say no, right? If we're being intentional about saying that no. And a comment here in the chat that I love is the greatest freedom is the freedom
Mhm.
of choice, and 100% agree with that. Oh, and as we continue with our webinar series, we're going to continue to explore all of these myths, right, and how they interplay with one another. The first session we did was all about the myth of the corporate safety net. Today was about, the fear of saying no. And next time we'll explore another myth that can quietly pull you away from the work and the life you actually want, and how to start steering back to joy. So that episode is actually going to take on the myth of I can do it all. And we'll talk about why asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. So look for information in your inbox on how to register, or Marie's going to put the link to pre-register into the chat. And we hope
Yep.
to see you then. And thank you so much for joining us on this journey back to joy.
Yes. Thank you.